At 3:17 in the morning, my wife's charity intern was broadcasting his location like a goddamn amateur. I'd been tracking radio frequency interference in our house for weeks. Occupational hazard when you've spent 15 years in global security consulting. Most people hear static and think bad reception. I hear patterns, signatures, digital fingerprints that tell stories their owners never meant to share. The signal spike hit exactly when footsteps crossed our hardwood foyer downstairs. Alex? Vivian's voice drifted up from the kitchen, honey sweet even at this ungodly hour. I'm just making some tea for Ethan. He's helping me finish the quarterly reports. I didn't respond. Instead, I adjusted the spectrum analyzer on my laptop, watching the frequency display paint a very different picture. The interference pattern was clean, expensive, the kind of unshielded transmission you'd expect from high-end encrypted hardware, specifically from a Patek Philippe Nautilus with integrated secure communications that I'd flagged in a theft dossier 18 months ago. Stolen from a collector in Manhattan, worth $40,000, never recovered. My wife claimed her new assistant was a pro bono intern, helping with her charity. I didn't point out that the intern was wearing a $40,000 Patek Philippe I recognized from a high-value theft dossier I processed during my time in global security. The logical thing would have been to confront them immediately. But 15 years of security work teaches you that information is ammunition, and you never fire your best rounds until you understand the full battlefield. I pulled up the house's smart security system on my secondary monitor. Our home was a fortress of my own design. Motion sensors, thermal imaging, encrypted cameras in every room except the bedrooms and bathrooms. Privacy laws, even for paranoid security consultants. Except I'd installed one additional camera they didn't know about. The basement workshop had been my sanctuary since we bought this place 3 years ago. Officially, it was where I restored vintage electronics. Unofficially, it was where I kept the tools of my former trade. Signal interceptors, frequency analyzers, and yes, a very discreet camera hidden behind what looked like a smoke detector. I switched to the basement feed and watched my wife of 7 years guide her intern down the stairs, her hand resting on his lower back in a way that had nothing to do with quarterly reports. Ethan Vale was 28, Harvard MBA, and according to his LinkedIn profile, passionate about giving back to the community. What his profile didn't mention was his apparent passion for giving it to my wife on my workbench. The rational part of my brain cataloged details with clinical precision. Duration, positions, the way Vivian's charity work suddenly required so many late-night sessions. The emotional part wanted to storm downstairs and introduce Ethan's face to my tool cabinet. But I'd learned patience in places where impatience got you eliminated, so I watched, recorded, and began planning. The frequency spike from Ethan's watch wasn't just expensive, it was traceable. Every encrypted transmission left digital breadcrumbs for someone who knew how to follow them. And after 15 years of following much more dangerous people than cheating spouses, I knew exactly how to turn those breadcrumbs into a roadmap to hell. I pulled up my contact database and found Ricky Morrison's number. Ricky ran security for the Red Circle, a high-end club downtown where people with expensive watches and expensive secrets liked to pretend they were invisible. The text I sent was simple: need a favor, the kind that pays well and asks no questions. His response came back in 30 seconds. When and where? I looked at my monitors, the frequency analyzer showing Ethan's continued presence, the security camera showing my wife straightening her clothes, the facial recognition software I'd been running that had just confirmed what I already suspected about our intern's real identity. Ethan Vale wasn't his real name. The facial recognition had matched him to Edward Vance, wanted in connection with 3 high-end thefts on the East Coast. No wonder he could afford that watch. He'd probably stolen it himself. My wife hadn't just found herself an intern. She'd found herself a career criminal. The question was whether she knew, or whether she was just another mark in whatever game Eddie was running. I closed the laptop and headed downstairs. Time to find out which kind of fool I'd married. The basement workshop smelled like metal polish and betrayal. I'd given them 20 minutes to finish whatever they were calling charity work before making my entrance. Long enough for the post-coital glow to fade, short enough that they'd still be adjusting their clothes when I walked in. Hope I'm not interrupting anything important, I said, flipping on the overhead fluorescence. Vivian jumped like she'd been electrocuted. Ethan, or Edward, or whatever his name was this week, had the reflexes of someone accustomed to quick exits. His hand moved instinctively toward his jacket before he remembered he was supposed to be an innocent intern. Alex? Vivian's voice pitched an octave higher than normal. You startled us. We were just reviewing the quarterly financials, I finished. Right, that's what you said upstairs. I walked to my workbench, noting the subtle disarray. Someone had moved my spectrum analyzer about 2 inches to the left. Amateurs. Funny thing about numbers, I continued, picking up a small electronic device that looked like a garage door opener but wasn't. They tell stories like this little frequency counter here. It's been tracking some interesting signals tonight. Ethan's face had gone pale, but he managed to keep his voice steady. I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Mercer. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I held up the device, watching its display. See this? It's showing a strong encrypted transmission source about 6 feet away, probably from something expensive, something that broadcasts its location whether the owner realizes it or not. The watch on Ethan's wrist wasn't visible under his sleeve, but I could see him resist the urge to cover it with his other hand. Vivian stepped between us, her charity gala smile firmly in place. Alex, you're being paranoid again. Ethan is here to help with the Foundation's books, nothing more. Nothing more. I nodded thoughtfully. So when you two were down here for 47 minutes, you were discussing what exactly? Tax exemptions? Donation processing? The best way to cook the books without triggering an audit? What are you talking about? But Vivian's voice had lost its confidence. I pulled out my phone and opened the security app. Smart House, remember? Motion sensors in every room. Thermal imaging that tracks body heat. And before you ask, yes, I know exactly what 47 minutes of elevated body temperature in my basement looks like on a thermal readout. Ethan finally found his voice. You're recording us? That's illegal. Actually, it's not. This is my house, my basement, and my wife. Privacy laws are funny things when you know how to read them. I smiled without warmth. But let's talk about illegal activities like identity theft or grand larceny or wearing stolen property worth more than most people's cars. The color drained completely from Ethan's face. That's right, Eddie. I know who you are. Facial recognition is a beautiful thing when you have access to the right databases. Edward Vance, wanted in connection with thefts in New York, Boston, and Hartford, specializes in high-end collectibles and has a particular fondness for luxury watches. Vivian looked between us, confusion replacing her earlier panic. What are you talking about? His name is Ethan Vale. Is it? I looked directly at him. Why don't you tell my wife about that Patek Philippe you're wearing? The one that was stolen from a collector in Manhattan 18 months ago? The one I personally processed through an insurance investigation? Ethan's hand moved unconsciously to his wrist, confirming what I already knew. You son of a witch, Vivian whispered. But she was looking at him, not me. Now we're getting somewhere. I leaned against my workbench, enjoying the show. The question is, Vivian, did you know you were sleeping with a wanted felon? Or are you just another mark in whatever con he's been running? The silence stretched for nearly a minute. I could see the wheels turning in both their heads. Ethan calculating escape routes, Vivian realizing how thoroughly she'd been played. Finally, Ethan spoke. You have no proof of anything. And even if you did, what are you going to do? Call the police? Tell them your wife is cheating? They'll laugh you out of the station. You're right about one thing, I said. I'm not calling the police. Not yet. See, I've learned that the best revenge isn't legal justice. It's personal justice, the kind that leaves you wishing you'd never heard my name. I pushed off from the workbench and walked toward the stairs. You have until tomorrow night to disappear, Eddie. After that, I start making calls to some very unforgiving people who've been looking for you. And Vivian? I paused at the bottom of the stairs. We'll discuss your career choices in the morning. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Ethan whisper urgently to my wife. He's bluffing. He has to be. But I wasn't bluffing. I was planning. And after 15 years of planning operations in places where failure meant end, destroying 2 cheating amateurs was going to be almost disappointingly easy. The real question was how far I was willing to go to make them pay. The answer I was discovering was further than I'd ever imagined. 24 hours later, I was sitting in my car outside the Red Circle, watching Ethan's stolen Patek Philippe broadcast his location like a digital ankle monitor. He hadn't disappeared. Of course he hadn't. Criminals like Eddie Vance don't run from threats. they escalate them, which was exactly what I'd been counting on. Ricky Morrison had been my point man in Kabul, back when the world was simpler and enemies wore uniforms. Now he worked security for people who could afford privacy, and he owed me enough favors to stock a small war. Targets inside, Ricky's voice crackled through my earpiece. VIP section, table 12. Got 2 guys with him I don't recognize. They look professional. How professional? The kind that check their exits and keep their hands free. I smiled in the darkness. Eddie had called for backup. This was about to get interesting. The red circle was 3 stories of pounding bass and artificial fog. The kind of place where people went to disappear into the crowd. Perfect for what I had planned. I checked my equipment one final time. Frequency jammer to disrupt Eddie's watch, small EMP device to eliminate the club's security cameras at the right moment, and a ceramic knife that wouldn't show up on metal detectors. Not that I planned to use it. I wasn't a butcher, but Eddie didn't know that. I'm coming in, I told Ricky. Give me 5 minutes, then cut the main lights. You sure about this, Alex? These guys look like they know their business. So do I. The club's interior was a maze of strobing lights and writhing bodies. The music was loud enough to rupture eardrums, which would work in my favor. Hard to coordinate when you can't hear your backup. I spotted Eddie at his table, flanked by 2 men who looked like they bench-pressed motorcycles for fun. He was nervous, checking his watch every few seconds, scanning the crowd. Smart boy. I worked my way closer, using the crowd as cover. The plan was simple. Isolate him from his protection, get him alone, and have a conversation about respect, the kind of conversation that left permanent impressions. At exactly midnight, the lights died. Emergency lighting kicked in 2 seconds later, bathing everything in hellish red. The crowd didn't panic. This was the kind of club where power outages were considered atmospheric, but Eddie's protection was caught off guard, reaching for weapons they couldn't use in a crowd of witnesses. I moved during those 2 seconds of absolute darkness, closing the distance between us. When the red lights came up, I was standing directly behind Eddie's chair. "Hello, Edward," I whispered in his ear. "We need to talk." He spun around, nearly falling off his chair. His bodyguards were already moving, but the crowd was thick, and they couldn't get a clear path. "You're insane," Eddie hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I do. You're a small-time thief who got lucky a few times and started believing his own press. But luck runs out, Eddie. Tonight, yours just did." The first bodyguard reached us, his hand inside his jacket. I hit him with the EMP device, a short, focused burst that fried every electronic device within 3 feet. His phone, his earpiece, and most importantly, his pacemaker. He went down hard, clutching his chest. Not dead, but definitely out of the fight. The second bodyguard was smarter. He circled around, trying to flank me, but I'd been fighting in crowds since before he learned to shave. When he moved, I was already gone, melting back into the mass of dancers. Eddie tried to follow his remaining protection toward the exit, but I'd anticipated that too. Ricky was waiting by the door, and Eddie found himself redirected toward the back of the club, away from witnesses and security cameras. I caught up with him in the service corridor, behind the kitchen. Alone, finally, with nowhere to run. "Your watch," I said calmly. "Take it off. Go to hell." I pulled out the ceramic knife, not to threaten him, but to show him I was serious. That watch belongs to a collector named Harrison Webb. He's 93 years old, and it was a gift from his late wife. You stole 40 years of memories when you took it. Eddie's bravado cracked slightly. "It's just a watch." "No, it's not. It's a symbol of everything that's wrong with people like you. You take things that don't belong to you, watches, money, other men's wives, and you convince yourself you deserve them." I stepped closer. "But here's what you don't understand, Eddie. Some things fight back." The knife moved faster than he could react, slicing through the watch's band. It fell to the floor with an expensive-sounding crash. "That was worth $40,000. Eddie lunged for the broken timepiece. "So is the lesson I'm about to teach you." I hit him in the solar plexus, not hard enough to cause permanent damage, but hard enough to drop him to his knees. Then I grabbed his collar and hauled him back to his feet. "You're going to disappear, Eddie. Tonight. You're going to crawl back to whatever hole you came from, and you're never going to contact my wife again. Because if you do, I'll make sure every criminal you've ever crossed knows exactly where to find you. You can't. I can. I have contacts in places you've never dreamed of. People who make your bodyguards look like kindergarten teachers. Cross me again, and I'll turn you into a case study in why you don't steal from the wrong people. I released him and stepped back. Oh, and Eddie? Tell your friends that Alex Mercer says hello. They'll know what that means. I left him there, gasping and broken, next to the remains of his stolen watch. As I walked away, I activated the frequency jammer one last time, making sure his backup couldn't track him through whatever other devices he was carrying. Ricky was waiting by the back exit. Clean? Clean, though I think we're about to have some very unhappy visitors looking for their missing friend. Good thing I don't know anything about that. We walked out into the night, leaving Eddie to explain to his employers how he'd managed to lose both the watch and his dignity in the same evening. But as satisfying as it had been to put Eddie in his place, I knew this was only the beginning. He was just a symptom of a larger problem. The real disease was waiting for me at home, probably wondering why her intern hadn't called. It was time to cure that disease permanently. Vivian was waiting in the kitchen when I got home, still dressed in her charity gala clothes despite the late hour. She looked like she'd been crying, but with my wife, appearances were just another tool in her arsenal. "Where have you been?" she asked without looking up from her coffee cup. "Taking care of our Eddie problem." I poured myself a drink from the bottle of bourbon she'd given me for our anniversary. Seemed appropriate. "He won't be bothering us anymore." "What did you do to him?" "Nothing permanent. Just explain the situation in terms he could understand." She finally looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Fear. Good. "Alex, we need to talk." "I agree. Let's start with how long you've been sleeping with wanted felons. Is this a new hobby, or have I been missing the signs for years?" "It's not what you think." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Really? Because what I think is that my wife has been screwing a career criminal in my basement while I was upstairs working to pay for this house, this life, and her precious charity." "Don't be crude." "Crude? Vivian, you've been entertaining a man who specializes in stealing from old people and widows. Crude doesn't begin to cover what you've been doing." She stood up, switching to the Wounded Dignity Act. "I made a mistake, I admit that, but Ethan..." "Edward? What?" "His name is Edward Vance. Ethan Vale was just another lie, like everything else about him. Like everything else about us, apparently." She sat back down heavily. "I didn't know. About his real name, about the stealing. I thought he was just..." "Just what? A young, handsome stranger who appeared out of nowhere to help your charity? A man who dressed better than most CEOs but worked for free? Come on, Vivian. You're not stupid. You just chose not to ask questions because you liked the answers you were getting." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I'd known this conversation was coming, but I hadn't expected it to feel so empty. After 7 years of marriage, we were finally being honest with each other, and it turned out we had nothing left to say. "What happens now?" she asked finally. Now we discuss terms." "Terms? You want a divorce, I assume?" "Fine, but it's going to be on my conditions, not yours." Her lawyer instincts kicked in. "Alex, let's not do anything hasty. We can work through this. Couples therapy, counseling. The time for working through things was before you decided to turn my basement into a brothel." I finished my bourbon and poured another. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to resign from the charity effective immediately." "I can't do that. It's my life's work. Your life's work was being married to me. You quit that job, so now you're quitting this one too. You can't make me..." "Actually, I can. See, I've been doing some research into your charity's finances. Amazing what you can discover when you know how to read between the lines. Like how much money has been going to consulting fees for your intern program. Or how many of those consultants seem to have criminal records." Her face went white. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Eddie wasn't your first mistake. He was just your most recent one. You've been running a money laundering operation disguised as charity work, and I have the evidence to prove it." "That's impossible. I would never..." "Consciously? Maybe not. But you've been so focused on playing Lady Bountiful that you never bothered to verify who you were actually helping. Half your volunteers are criminals using your charity to clean their money. The other half are con artists using it to find new marks." I pulled out my phone and showed her a series of financial reports I'd compiled. $300,000 in administrative costs last year, $200,000 in consulting fees, and all of it going to people who don't exist or shouldn't exist. She stared at the numbers, her face cycling through disbelief, horror, and finally understanding. "Oh God," she whispered, "what have I done? You've been played. By Eddie, by half a dozen others, and probably by people you haven't even met yet. Your charity is a front, Vivian, and you're the perfect front woman. Beautiful, naive, and just arrogant enough to believe you're smarter than everyone else. We have to call the police, report this, fix it. We're not doing anything. You are going to quietly resign, citing personal reasons. You're going to recommend that the board conduct a full financial audit. And then you're going to disappear from public life until this all blows over. And if I don't, then I release everything I've found to the FBI, the IRS, and the Boston Globe simultaneously. Your charity gets shut down, you get investigated for fraud, and everyone you've ever worked with gets dragged through the mud, including some very dangerous people who don't like publicity." She was crying now, real tears this time. "Alex, please, I never meant for any of this to happen. I know you didn't. That's what makes it so pathetic." I stood up and headed for the stairs. "You have until tomorrow to decide. Quiet resignation and divorce, or public destruction and divorce. Either way, we're done. Where are you going?" "To pack. I'll be staying at a hotel until you make your choice. When I come back, I want you gone. This is my house, too." "No, it's not. It's in my name, bought with my money, secured with my systems. You've been a guest here for 7 years, Vivian. Now your invitation has been revoked." As I climbed the stairs, I could hear her sobbing in the kitchen. Part of me felt sorry for her. She really had been played, manipulated by people who were better at lying than she was at detecting lies. But sympathy was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when there were still loose ends to tie up. Because Eddie hadn't been working alone, and his partners weren't going to be happy about losing their inside access to the charity's money. They'd be coming for me next, thinking they could intimidate me into backing down. They were about to learn why that was a mistake. The first attempt on my life came 3 days later while I was having lunch at a diner downtown. I'd been expecting it, of course. You don't destroy someone's money laundering operation without consequences. What surprised me was how amateur the attempt was. 2 men in cheap suits who thought they could intimidate me with threats and bad cologne. "Mr. Mercer?" The taller one slid into the booth across from me without invitation. "We need to talk." "About what?" I continued eating my sandwich, keeping my voice casual. "About your wife's charity work. Seems there's been some misunderstanding about her resignation." "No misunderstanding. She quit. End of story." The second man positioned himself by the exit, thinking he was being subtle. These weren't Eddie's bodyguards from the club, they were lower tier. The kind of muscle you hired when you needed quantity over quality. "See, that's the problem," the tall one continued. "Mrs. Mercer was involved in some very important community outreach programs. Programs that can't just be shut down because of a domestic dispute. Domestic dispute." I set down my sandwich and looked at him directly. "Is that what we're calling embezzlement and fraud now?" His smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. "Careful, Mr. Mercer. You're making accusations that could be very dangerous for your health." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm offering friendly advice. Your wife made some commitments, financial commitments. Those need to be honored, regardless of your marital problems." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us. "This conversation is being recorded and uploaded to a secure server in real time. If something unfortunate happens to me, copies will be automatically sent to the FBI, the Boston Police, and several journalists who specialize in organized crime." The tall man's smile faltered slightly. "You're paranoid, Mr. Mercer." "I'm careful, there's a difference." I leaned forward. "Here's some friendly advice for you. Walk away, right now. Because if you don't, I'm going to make you wish you'd never heard of Vivian's charity. You're just one man. One man with 15 years of experience in places that make Boston look like Disneyland. One man with contacts and agencies you've never heard of. One man who's very, very good at making problems disappear permanently." I stood up and dropped a 20 on the table. "Tell your boss that Alex Mercer said to find a new laundering operation. This one is closed." As I walked toward the exit, the second man stepped into my path. Big mistake. I grabbed his wrist and applied pressure to a nerve cluster I'd learned about in a military training course. He went down like a sack of concrete, gasping and clutching his arm. Pressure point paralysis, I explained to his partner. Temporary but extremely painful. The next person who threatens me gets the permanent version. I left them there, one writhing on the floor, the other trying to decide if his paycheck was worth tangling with someone who clearly knew how to handle himself. But I knew this was just the opening move. Whoever was running the operation behind Vivian's charity wouldn't give up that easily. They'd invested too much time and money to let it all disappear because of one angry husband, which meant I needed to take the fight to them before they could regroup. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing research. Financial records, property deeds, business licenses, all the boring paperwork that told the real story behind the charity's operations. What I found was worse than I'd expected. The charity wasn't just laundering money for local criminals. It was part of a larger network, connected to operations in 6 other cities. Vivian hadn't just been seduced by a petty thief. She'd been recruited by a sophisticated criminal organization that specialized in using legitimate charities as fronts. And Eddie Vance wasn't a small-time criminal. He was a talent scout, sent to identify and compromise people who could be useful to the organization. People like my naive, ambitious wife. The more I dug, the angrier I became. Vivian had been played, yes, but she'd also been complicit. She'd ignored obvious warning signs because she'd enjoyed the attention, the excitement, the feeling of being important to dangerous people. Well, now she was going to learn what it felt like to be unimportant to someone truly dangerous. I made a series of phone calls to old contacts, people who owed me favors from my consulting days. By evening, I had names, addresses, and detailed information about everyone involved in the operation. The organization was run by a man named Vincent Torino, who operated out of a legitimate-seeming import business in the warehouse district. He specialized in corruption, finding clean, respectable people, and turning them into unwitting accomplices. Vivian had been perfect for his needs, beautiful, connected, and just arrogant enough to believe she was too smart to be fooled. Time to show Mr. Torino what happened when he tried to fool the wrong person's wife. Vincent Torino's warehouse looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. A legitimate import business run by a respectable businessman. Clean trucks, proper signage, workers who looked like they actually moved cargo for a living. But I'd learned long ago that the best covers were the ones that were mostly true. Torino probably did import goods from overseas. He just imported other things along with the legal merchandise. I'd been watching the operation for 2 days, learning the patterns. Torino arrived every morning at 8, left for lunch at noon, and stayed until 6. His security was good but not exceptional. 2 armed guards during business hours, electronic surveillance, and a state-of-the-art alarm system. What they didn't have was protection against someone who understood their business better than they did. I made my move on a Thursday afternoon when Torino would be alone in his office reviewing the week's shipments. The approach was simple. Walk in the front door like I belonged there, disable the security, and have a conversation about professional boundaries. The receptionist was young, pretty, and probably had no idea what kind of business she was really working for. "Can I help you?" "Alex Mercer to see Mr. Torino. He's expecting me." She checked her computer, frowning. "I don't see an appointment scheduled." "Tell him it's about the Vivian Mercer situation. He'll want to see me." 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from Vincent Torino in his expensively decorated office. He was older than I'd expected, probably in his 60s, with the kind of calm confidence that came from years of successful criminal enterprise. "Mr. Mercer, I've been hearing interesting things about you. All true, I'm sure. My associates tell me you're being unreasonable about your wife's charitable commitments. Your associates are lucky to be walking upright after our last conversation." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You have a reputation for violence, Mr. Mercer. That's unfortunate. I prefer to handle business disagreements through negotiation. So do I. That's why I'm here, instead of burning down your warehouse. Direct, I appreciate that in a man." He leaned back in his chair. "Your wife was very useful to our organization. Losing her cooperation has created certain complications. Find another charity. Boston has plenty of naive do-gooders who'd love to help you clean your money." "It's not that simple." Mrs. Mercer had access to certain financial networks, certain social connections. "Replacing her will take time and money." "Not my problem. Actually, it is. You see, your wife signed certain agreements, contracts that bind her to provide services for a specific period of time. Breaking those contracts would be expensive. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photograph I'd taken the night before. It showed him leaving a restaurant with a woman who wasn't his wife, heading toward a hotel room he'd paid for with charity funds. Blackmail, Mr. Torino? Really? I thought you were more sophisticated than that. His face went pale. Where did you get that? I told you I had a reputation for violence. What I didn't mention was my reputation for information gathering. I know about your operation in Hartford, your money transfers through the Cayman Islands, and your very creative use of charitable tax exemptions. I leaned forward. I also know about your wife, your children, and your legitimate business interests. The ones that would disappear overnight if the IRS decided to take a close look at your books. What do you want? I want you to forget my wife exists. I want you to find a new operation in a different city. And I want you to make sure that none of your associates ever contact me or my family again. And if I refuse, then I release everything I've gathered to law enforcement, the media, and your competitors. Your operation gets shut down, your assets get frozen, and you spend the rest of your life explaining to federal prosecutors why you thought charity fraud was a good career choice. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. I could see him calculating odds, weighing options, trying to find an angle that didn't end with his destruction. Finally, he nodded. You're a dangerous man, Mr. Mercer. Only to people who threaten my family. Your wife betrayed your family. Why are you protecting her? I'm not protecting her. I'm protecting my reputation. If word gets out that Vincent Torino could manipulate Alex Mercer's wife, every criminal in New England will think I'm an easy target. I can't allow that. He understood. In his world, reputation was everything. Showing weakness invited hunters. We'll relocate our operations, he said finally, but this courtesy only extends so far. If you interfere with our business again, the consequences will be severe. Fair enough. As long as your business doesn't involve my family, we have no quarrel. I stood to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Mr. Torino, if anything unfortunate happens to me or my wife in the next year, copies of everything I've gathered will be released automatically. Insurance policy. As I walked out of his office, I felt the satisfaction of a job well done. Torino would keep his word. Men like him understood the value of clean exits from bad situations. But my work wasn't finished yet. There was still one more person who needed to understand the consequences of betraying Alex Mercer. And she was waiting for me at home, probably wondering why her criminal friends had suddenly stopped returning her calls. Vivian was packing when I got home, stuffing clothes into suitcases with the desperate efficiency of someone who'd finally realized how much trouble she was in. Going somewhere? She didn't look up from her packing. My sister's place in Vermont, and just until things settle down. Things are settled. I took care of your business partners today. That got her attention. What do you mean? I mean, Vincent Torino and his organization have decided to relocate their operations. Permanently. Your services are no longer required. She sat down heavily on the bed. How do you know about Vincent? I know about everything, Vivian. The money laundering, the fake volunteers, the systematic corruption of your charity. I know about the contracts you signed and the commitments you made to people who eliminate for a living. You never meant to get caught. There's a difference. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her fall apart. The question is, what do we do now? We? You're still my wife, technically. That makes your problems my problems, at least until the divorce is finalized. I thought you wanted me gone. I do. But I want you gone safely. If Torino's people decide you're a liability, running to Vermont won't save you. They'll find you eventually. She looked up at me with something that might have been hope. What are you saying? I'm saying I've negotiated your exit from this situation. Clean break, no retaliation, no loose ends. But there are conditions. What kind of conditions? First, you disappear completely. New city, new identity, new life. No contact with anyone from your old life, including me. Alex, second, you never work in charity or nonprofit again. Too much temptation, too many opportunities for people like Torino to find you. That's my whole career. Your whole career was a lie. Time to find a new one. I pulled out an envelope and tossed it on the bed next to her suitcase. Third, you take this money and use it to start over. It's enough for a year of living expenses and some basic job training. She opened the envelope and stared at the cash inside. Where did this come from? Torino's organization owed you severance pay. I collected it. You stole from them? I negotiated a settlement. There's a difference. I smiled without humor. Consider it compensation for services rendered. She counted the money, $50,000 in unmarked bills. Enough to disappear properly, if she was smart about it. And if I don't agree to these conditions, then you're on your own. No protection, no money, no help from me when Torino decides you know too much to live. The silence stretched between us as she weighed her options. Finally, she nodded. When do I leave? Night. I've already made arrangements. There's a car waiting outside that will take you to a bus station in Springfield. From there, you're on your own. You've thought of everything, haven't you? It's what I do. She stood up and closed her suitcase. Alex, I want you to know, don't. Whatever you're about to say, don't. We're past the point of apologies and explanations. I loved you. Once. I know. I loved you too. That's why you're getting this chance instead of a funeral. She flinched at the coldness in my voice, but she didn't argue. She was finally beginning to understand the kind of man she'd been married to and the kind of enemies she'd made. 20 minutes later, she was gone. No goodbye kiss, no final embrace. Just the sound of a car pulling away from the house we'd shared for 3 years. I poured myself a bourbon and sat in my empty kitchen listening to the silence. For the first time in weeks, I felt something approaching peace. My phone rang. Torino's voice was calm, professional. Your wife is traveling tonight, I understand. She is. Our business is concluded. Indeed, I wanted to thank you for handling this situation so efficiently. You saved us all a great deal of unpleasantness. Professional courtesy. Quite. Should you ever find yourself in need of employment, Mr. Mercer, I know people who would value your particular skills. I'll keep that in mind. After he hung up, I deleted his number from my phone. Vincent Torino was a problem I'd solved, not a contact I wanted to maintain. I walked through the house one final time, checking the security systems, making sure everything was locked down properly. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of selling the place and moving somewhere new. Somewhere without memories of charity galas and basement betrayals. But tonight, I was content to sit in my fortress and appreciate the silence. My wife had wanted excitement, danger, the thrill of living on the edge. She'd gotten all of that and more. Now she was someone else's problem, assuming she was smart enough to stay hidden. As for me, I'd learned something valuable about the difference between justice and revenge. Justice was what the courts provided, slow, uncertain, often unsatisfying. Revenge was what you created yourself, swift, certain, and perfectly tailored to the crime. Vivian had betrayed our marriage for the excitement of danger. Now she'd have danger for the rest of her life, wondering if today was the day her past caught up with her. Eddie Vance had stolen from people who couldn't fight back. Now he was running from people who could, carrying nothing but the clothes on his back and the knowledge that his luck had finally run out. Vincent Torino had built an empire on the corruption of good people. Now he was relocating that empire, knowing that Alex Mercer was watching and waiting for any sign of renewed interest in his family. Perfect justice? Maybe not. But perfectly satisfying revenge? Absolutely. I raised my glass to the empty house and smiled. To new beginnings, I said aloud, and the people who make them necessary. Outside, it started to rain. Inside, I was finally warm.